Well, we did it. We changed the name of the chicken Kiev at Sainsbury's.
Finally.
Yeah, welcome to Kiev, future.
We changed the name of the Russian blue cat to the Ukrainian blue.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're absolutely beyond parody.
The cocktail is now a white Ukrainian.
Is it really?
I have seen with my own eyes a sign taped over a cocktail machine that said white Ukrainian.
Now, for me, the terms white Russian and white Ukrainian have very different associations. And I would be loath to use the second one.
Feeling like a white Ukrainian.
Yeah.
Just feeling like a white Stepan Bandera.
What else
Every
is
day
happening?
of his life, Stepan Bandera was feeling like a white Stepan Bandera.
Yeah.
I also got accused this week of funding and arming the Azov battalion because I'm doing a benefit gig for the Ukrainian Red Cross.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And I'm like,
why does that cross
on,
have all of the extra arms on it? Weird.
Oh, sorry. I got confused.
We
The red swastika that only does Nazi aid.
I got confused. I forgot what a cross looked like, and instead,
we will give you emergency surgery, but we will measure your skull first.
Yeah. So wait. Is you forgot what a cross looks like? You just kind of wing it and are like, I hope I stop here. Maybe I'll turn. Okay, try it again.
Hang on. Why is all this food aid coming in the form of a one-pot meal cooked on a Sunday?
But yeah, it's I feel like we've reached the freedom fries portion of the sort of.
We're gonna get real dumb about this.
We're gonna, absolutely. It's
we
gonna go further.
Can't do anything, and so the only thing, quite literally, I have used the lathe to terrible effect because now it's been applied to foreign policy too, where the only thing we can do is the impossible, right? Yeah. The only possible lever we can pull on now that we've used all of the sanctions is start nuclear war with Russia.
Yeah. It's very funny.
And I think, I mean, this is sort of what we're gonna talk about a bit in the first.
Yeah, because a bunch of people.
By the way. Hi everyone, it's TF.
Oh yeah, hi.
It's Alice, Riley, and Milo. You know the score. And later on in this episode, I will be talking to
Russian troops approaching the buttery, garlicky center of Kiev.
I will be talking to Thea Riofrancos, who is a professor at Providence College, about mining.
What kind? Like computer or rocks?
I forget.
Same thing.
They used to dig computers out of the ground in my day.
Were you talking about earlier the Arthur Scargill of the Bitcoin miners?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm the Arthur Scargill of Bitcoin. Whatever that means. Construct your own bit from that sentence.
Yeah, there it is. I think it's like because sort of the experience of most people of like politics and political events is just so isolated, alienated, and enervated, but also like mediated entirely through like TV and the news or whatever. Just purely
same thing now.
Yeah, just purely just a tidal wave of information bearing down on you. Then all you can really do is be like, well, we're gonna change the name of the frozen dinner.
Yeah, well, the thing is, right, you know how I said that, like, no one predicted the Russian invasion except for me and a couple of other weirdos because nobody has autism, really. Because we didn't do enough MMR jabs and we didn't manage to give everybody autism. Well, now the problem is that now the news has engaged war mode, and now normal people who should, go home and be a family man are DMing me, asking me what I think about certain makes of UAVs. And it's like, no. I am supposed to care about that. You're not supposed to care about that.
Yeah. What I learned from the OSINT guys was there's an even deeper level of autism, because some of the OSINT guys who like fully do this all the time, they didn't think there was going to be an invasion because they were like, the Russian OPSEC was so bad and they were just letting civilians come and take photos of all their convoys and stuff. And they're like, you just wouldn't do this if you go to an invasion. And then they realized that the reason why they were doing that was because the Russian soldiers themselves had no fucking idea.
Oh yeah, they all had return tickets, which is very funny.
Incredible. What really shocked me, though, was not so much that they didn't know before they did it, but that a lot of them didn't even know they were invading Ukraine several hours in. It was only when they started being shot at that they... So lots of Russian soldiers genuinely thought they were defending themselves, having been randomly attacked on what they thought was a normal military exercise. God. Completely insane.
I mean, and so I think it's unsurprising to think, right, that this situation that's been made sort of ever more, sort of tenuous, that to react to it just by being like, well, we're going to change the name of the frozen dinner. We're going to pour out the vodka. We're going to,
It's already called Chicken Kiev. That's
it's
just
gonna be,
English
It's going to be
Kiev.
called Chicken Kiev now. I mean...
That's the irony of it, is that Kiev makes sense as a spelling in Ukrainian, where they have two different kinds of I. It doesn't make sense as a spelling in English, because that will just make people say it wrong. People will start saying Kiev, which is not the fucking name
Labour
of the
leader
city.
Sir Keith Starmer.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, we've all gone insane, right? Because as we've established, there is nothing that the UK or even really NATO can now do other than start nuclear war. Like, our two options, having already done a shitload of stuff, like all of the shipping weapons, training people, we'd already done that, and it's actually proved to be quite helpful. But right now, our only options for what do we do about this humanitarian crisis are, absent attempt to care for some of the refugees and the general fallout of it, are either A, do nothing, or B, destroy all life on Earth. And A is so intolerable to a lot of people that they're seriously pushing for B.
It's really the two buttons meme, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're really sweating over this one.
But
I'm very excited if we ever get invaded by Russia and the French, in a gesture of solidarity, will rename custard creme English. Can't wait for that.
Don't like it as a creme.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
I think Alice, that's basically something I've been sort of just racking my brain. I'm trying to not rack my brain about, to be honest, for the last little while, of just the sort of and I think it's related to. I think it's related to that kind of weird sort of obsessive media parochialism that makes you rename the frozen dinner, which is that essentially our political and media machine knows only how to perform a spectacle, and they are entirely woefully unprepared to do something other than perform a spectacle, to engage with real events that they cannot dictate the terms of.
It's so inward looking. I think British media has forgotten how to talk about or to anything other than British people. And I think this leads you to possibly my favorite tweet of the last couple of weeks, which is an FPPE person saying, I can't be the only person who thinks that if the UK had voted to stay in the EU, this invasion wouldn't be happening.
Yeah, because of that EU army that we'd be a part of.
Absolutely. We would send the Eurocorps.
And also because Vladimir Putin is pissed off at us because we left the EU, apparently.
Yeah.
What?
I mean, you see you see sort of articles in coming up saying, this it's saying now there's also proof that the Russians were behind Trump and Brexit and all this. And we talked about this already, right? If they supported it at all, they were pushing on a fucking open door. Yeah, but we're just using all of this to relitigate all of our favorite media fights of the last 10 years, while at the same time there is an actual humanitarian crisis going on. There's an actual there are lots of actual humanitarian crises going on. There's one that where for to be honest, pretty racist reasons, the refugees have a more purchase on, say, the sympathy of countries that can provide them refuge.
Oh, yeah.
And fucking Preeti Patel's department was they can come here if they can pick fruit. They can come here for 3 months.
That's been so funny to me, is that every country in the EU has been often quite explicitly, these are white Christians, therefore we will absolutely, they're not like other refugees, we will open every door for them. And Britain, however, stands alone, the last bastion of the cry laugh emoji, still going, fuck off, we're full.
Yeah. The British right are consistent, in much the same way as the American right are inconsistent because they defund everything except the police and the army, and the British right are no, that's left wing. You have to also cut the police and the army. We also apply that to refugees. Even when they're white, we still don't want them.
It's baffling, right? Just having the courage of your own awful convictions and being nope, still don't want them. Fuck off.
Yeah. Being a true ideologue.
I mean, if we want to think about like having the courage of your convictions as well, it's become very sort of instructive in the last week. I mean, since we last recorded, we are recording this on Saturday the 5th of March.
At time of recording, there is still a world to receive this.
But it's I think that some of the most shocking things, right, have been the extent to which the people pushing hardest for number one, thank God the people pushing hard for a no-fly zone, which again, it's a zone. It's like a no parking, right?
Yeah, it's not like the congestion charge.
It's like
not really a big deal.
It's like half a war. It's like a war but good. It's
going to be camera enforced, and the Russian planes will get a ticket every time they fly over.
Yeah, we're doing the ULEZ.
That's right.
I'm always doing
does this Su-35 have a Euro 6 compliant engine?
But that's where it seems like it's the pundit class and the sort of liberal idealist sort of wing of British politics, right? Who are seem to be most keen.
Best exemplified by Dan Hodges. Yeah. Britain's greatest, most powerful brain. Once again, speaking about having the courage of your stupid ass convictions, a man who took to Twitter and went, "Okay, well, we should do a no-fly zone, and we have to do something, and this is something, so this is the something that we should do." And when someone many people in the replies went, "Okay, but if you do a no-fly zone, you're going to have to enforce it, and if you enforce it, you're going to have to like shoot down Russian aircraft with, I guess, British aircraft." So would you do that? And credit to Dan Hodges for engaging with this. Just immediately went yes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same thing with fucking with Joe Swinson, right? There's this weird there's this brain slug attached to British liberals that makes them. I think that makes them sort of
Actually, let's put a swing zone over Ukraine.
they need to where I feel like they have this sense. This sense that they need to prove themselves that they're ard, right? That they're ard bastards.
Yeah, they all of them want to be like impressive and tactical, and all of them want the troops to tell them that they're like being serious. But the military doesn't want to do this, not least because it would start World War III, but also because like it makes no military sense. Like there's no reason.
At least at time of recording.
Yeah, there's no real reason to do it. Like it's still
the point where they've given the Ukrainians a load of planes and they're letting them base themselves out of Poland, which is kind of giving themselves a tactical advantage. And also like the Russian planes are having to fly low because they don't have any guided munitions. So fucking Ukrainian farmers are shooting them down with all the little toys we gave them.
What sensible RAF officer would ever want any of their planes flying over like Ukraine, where we have given every farmer and every farmer's mum every kind of man-portable air defense system we can hand them?
And I think what this sort of comes to, right? It's not just about like, tweets and articles. It's about this thing, right? Where we've seen it happen sort of so many times before, where the Western liberal politics and press goes into war hysteria mode. And again, that's not to say that nowhere else doesn't, right? Like I think Russia has done that in a much worse way. But when we do it, like you can see that there is this idea that like things like that the considerations of we need to find off ramps, we need to get this conflict stopped as soon as possible, becomes just people competing with one another to see who can talk about escalation the fastest. And I'll tell you what I'm reminded of. And this is going to seem strange initially, but I'll explain why. I'm reminded of QAnon. And that's because...
No, I get what you're saying.
Because QAnon is a group storytelling project where whatever narrative sticks is the one that one-ups all the others the most. That's why I always say, like, it's the reason that they said that all, like, these Democrats were satanic pedophiles isn't because they have worries about child trafficking. It's because satanic pedophile is the highest stakes you can make it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not like, Trump is mobilizing the deep state against these people. It's like Trump is actually having them secretly executed in Guantanamo Bay because that's, it one-ups the thing. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I think you're right.
Yeah, and I think like situations like this, they play into like a lot of people who are like less politically cynical's desire to like that we should be doing something.
Yeah.
And a lot of those people have like a quite uncritical engagement with it, and they see that quite a lot of Ukrainians are calling for a no-fly zone, which is like understandable. It's obviously very emotive for them, but like surely you should be thinking about this a bit more if you're a newspaper columnist.
Yeah, well, because I think they see themselves as just it goes back even to like a lot of how we were talking about how they see themselves and ideas, right? They're just they're just putting stuff out there, and if it's not a good idea, it'll get defeated in the marketplace of debate. They don't see themselves as
the no-fly zone of debate.
Yeah, they don't see themselves as manufacturing consensus. And what they've and the scary thing is
they're not even doing it successfully. Like there ain't gonna fucking be one. No way.
But like that's the ultimate endpoint for the British press. I think is trying to manufacture consent for the impossible. Like if you tried to if you got every British columnist on board was trying to blow up the moon, right? That would be more likely to happen as a result of them writing about it.
Yeah.
It's a combination of that and like Caitlin Moran being like, that's the other thing, right? It's just like with coronavirus. I think it's all sort of stitched together in this way, right? That with COVID, right? The standard liberal response in the States was, I want Fauci to blow my back out. Yeah. I want him to like, bust on me. Yeah. And now it's
a no-fly zone in my ass.
And a bunch of the same people are being like, "Damn, I want Zelensky to eat my asshole."
I mean, I've been trying to think about how I would explain Caitlin Moran to a non-British audience for a while, and I posted this, but the best I could come up with is that we as a country just kind of use her as like a professional 14-year-old that we just keep around, I guess, and she's in this kind of stratum, right, of like former working class women like Tracy Emin or like Julie Burchill who have like worked their way into the media class and are now allowed to stay there on the condition that they say all of the right things, which are tremendously weird things, and look every day a bit more like a fucked bird's nest.
And in Julie Burchill's case, talk like this, like a Tolkien character. Yeah, that's like a fascinating energy. I actually like Tracy Emin is also like so fucking weird. I met her once because I used to go out with someone who ran an art gallery, and she specifically came over because she wanted to talk to us, and then proceeded to like not say anything and just kind of like stand there like being really. And I'm like, why did you come over here? And then I was whispering in my girlfriend's ear, being like, can I ask her if she's Banksy? And she was like, you cannot do that.
She's like, no.
But it would be really funny.
But what I was saying, but even bringing up the Caitlin Moran thing, is you can see like it's just these untenable situations getting more and more tense, and then just these intensely personalized sort of reactions to the news. It's like, I like Zelensky, he makes me horny. We're going to rename the name of the chicken frozen dinner.
You know what it is, right? It's that the British media class copes very poorly with powerlessness and realizing its own powerlessness. And that's why they're all like, oh, we can't just do nothing. Because they're in an almost unique position in Britain of 2022 where they have not yet been forced into a situation where they've not been able to do anything before. This is like a totally novel sensation to them, and for that, they have a little bit of sympathy for me.
Yeah, well,
and also all of this kind of like banning of like Russian stuff that's going on has like really put a bad taste in my mouth.
Oh yeah,
like canceling fucking like Russian ballets and shit. Like the extent to which like everyone I know in Russia is like completely terrified of what's going on and their own government, and like it's like a very weird stance to take. If anything, like having spoken to quite a few friends in Ukraine and in Russia, the ones in Russia seem more fucking terrified than the ones in Ukraine do. The ones in Ukraine have like a kind of sense of unity and like they're fighting for something. The ones in Russia are just like completely despondent.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be a lot more scared that like the FSB was going to kick my door in or whatever than
some of my friends have literally been threatened by the FSB, have come to their house and threatened to be like, do not say anything about this online.
It's genuinely very frightening, the extent to which it turns out there is just a big repression switch in Putin's office, I guess, and you just turn the dial all the way to the right.
You can clearly see across the British media and political sort of firmament, everyone trying to sort of make this about their own thing, which only I think makes the world a sort of, in as much as they might be successful, which is, even though they're creating super majorities of like polled support for these kinds of things, like, we can hope they won't be, which is, and the sum total of that, right, is that they can't escape their boxes. No. It's why you see, articles being pushed now where it's like, why hasn't Corbyn denounced the war in Ukraine? It's like, well, no, he has. Why are you asking about him? He's one MP. But also,
what we need is an airspace in Ukraine that's restricted to women and girls.
Maybe I should start demanding that Vladimir Zhirinovsky comment on every bit of British politics. Why has Vladimir Zhirinovsky not denounced Boris Johnson's birthday party? That's what I want to know.
If there's any Russian politician that would, it would be him, on the basis that it's like birthday parties are decadent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he'd be like, this is gay. You should try working in mine, Bitcoin or otherwise.
But it's you can see this as well, right? Where it's like being totally enveloped in this spectacle means that we can only engage in spectacular responses.
It's like a tape player that's like unwound on one end and it's just spooling down back in on itself.
Yeah, and it's just sort of, it's because like Liz Truss, right, is like, yes, I think it was going off the dome.
I never thought that a Tory girl boss could be a threat to global security, and I was wrong about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's weirdly like highlighted something which I've been going on about for a while, which is how like Russia in people's imaginations differs so much from like the reality of what Russia is like. Like, I mean, we talk about like Britain and America being like decaying sclerotic former empires, but my God, Russia like turn it times 100. Like the extent to which like all their trucks have been falling apart because they haven't been used in 5 years and like the tires have rotted and all this shit, and just like none of their soldiers know what they're supposed to be doing. Meanwhile, Ukraine, it turns out, is a nation of just Terry Peck. Where just like every man, woman, and child is like, I will drink the blood of the invader. And so that all of this stuff are kind of about like a no-fly zone or whatever. It's like kind of, I don't know, the Ukrainians are kind of giving him a slacking, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. So I think like if you want to talk about trust, right, it's her comments about like regime change, sponsoring, saying, yeah, if you're in the British Army, you can just go do freelance or whatever. Again, like clearly unbriefed, just again trying to perform for a spectacle of domestic media consumption without really understanding that anyone else is going to see it and can act on it.
Oh, the gym guys. I loved the Sky News report on the gym guys.
We've had the gym
just
guys.
A bunch of big, beefy dudes who were just like, yeah, I've got no military experience, but, you know, got to help them out.
And the people who do have military experience, this leads me to my favorite BBC article where they went to a collection point where people were like handing in like body armor to transport to Ukraine. And they spoke to an Essex military surplus dealer who asked to be known only as a Wazza.
Amazing.
And Wazza was in the course of sending fucking desert uniforms to Ukraine.
Yeah, the desert bomb.
Yeah, absolutely. So if the Ukrainians like survive for any even greater length of time, it will be solely down to the force of like Essex military surplus guys.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk a little more about definitely an interesting type of British guy after my conversation with Thea. See you in a sec. Thank you, Past Riley, for that wonderful introduction. Hi, everybody. It's me, Riley, from before. You remember before, the podcast you were listening to. And I'm speaking with Thea Riofrancos, who is an assistant professor of political science at Providence College in the States, and who writes on extractivism, climate politics, and the left. And she recently had an article in Foreign Policy that I really wanted to talk about. That was all about the onshoring of mining, right? The onshoring of mining operations, especially to do with the metals that power the alleged upcoming electric vehicle revolution. And when we were talking, and she mentioned, you think it's an under-discussed, under-theorized, under-thought about bit of left politics, and especially, of course, the resistance to extractivist, often very imperialist and hawkish, as we'll talk about, capital, and one in which actually some victories have been scored for the good guys, so to speak, in the last few years. So, Thea, thank you very much for coming and talking to me today.
Thanks for having me.
So,
I'm just going to start us off, right? Because what do we mean when we talk about like onshoring versus offshoring? Why are these minerals important? Can you just give us a bit of the lay of the land?
Yeah, there's so much to say because there's so much about the past few decades of global capitalism and political economy that are like smushed together in this onshoring phrase and in thinking about so-called critical minerals. So I think just to step back a little bit, I'm sure listeners are familiar and you're familiar with like the hegemony of neoliberal globalization, right? This is the hegemony we've been living under for the past couple of decades, in which it was taken as a kind of article of faith that the best way to organize the economy is to send production, whether it's extraction like mining or whether it's factories, just send all of that to wherever it's quote unquote cheapest, right? Wherever quote labor is cheapest or nature is cheapest, wherever it's most economically efficient, wherever there's so-called comparative advantage. So these are kind of like the principles of neoclassical economics that undergirded the Washington consensus of neoliberal globalization. And that, all of our economic elites, political elites, foreign policy elites were totally happy with that. They promoted it a lot. And this is on both sides of the pond, right? In the US, the UK, the European Union, we're all avid fans of neoliberalizing and globalizing economic production. Then all of a sudden, if you weren't tracking this closely, it would seem like a very sudden shift. During the pandemic or, in the past year or two, all of a sudden elites are like worried about supply chains. They're like, wait a second, we have created this global economy in which production is spread out everywhere. There's a lot of spatial dispersion between the beginnings of production, whether again, it's mining, logistics, factories, and where things are ultimately consumed. In addition, there's some quote unquote vulnerabilities built into what's called just-in-time production, a wonky phrase, but it just means you keep inventories and costs as low as possible so that not a cent more is spent on anything and you maximize profits, right? So during the pandemic, all of this suddenly seemed like a problem, right? It seemed like a problem that certain places were where protective equipment was imported from, and there were snarls in those supply chains. It also seemed like a problem that inventories and stocks of certain essential goods were quite low. And elites started talking about, like, maybe we in the global north, to be clear, in the US, Europe, UK, maybe we shouldn't have sent our production everywhere else in the world. Maybe we should bring it back, right? And I also want this to resonate a little bit with the kind of Trumpian moment, with the Boris Johnson, with this sort of idea that like we need to be great again, underscore we as the global north. And so there's a competitive and geopolitical kind of logic here. But a lot of kind of trends and patterns came together in this idea that we are losing the global economic game. Also, there's a lot of vulnerabilities and lack of resiliency, and we should bring everything that's important back within our borders. And so this is a change that unfolded over time, and like many changes that we're currently witnessing was accelerated by the pandemic, but preceded it and also sort of overdetermined. But we're seeing it play out, I think, most concertedly at this moment around what we could call the supply chains of green technologies. And green technologies, another piece of jargon, but a useful one to know, are technologies that purport to save us from climate crisis. And I say purport, not some of them do save us, some of them are just speculative and whatever. It's a mix, it depends. I'm not like against green technologies, but we should sometimes be wary when things are called green or clean. These technologies, like everything else that I just mentioned, like fast fashion, like food, whatever, are produced through these global supply chains. But what's kind of interesting about them is that we think of these technologies as green or clean, and they also do, have their role in mitigating and transitioning to mitigating climate crisis and transitioning to a renewable energy system. But like everything else under capitalism, they begin with appropriation of nature in the extractive frontiers of our, world system. And I think it's that kind of dissonance between the fact that they are climate-saving technologies potentially, but have lots of environmental and social impacts, especially at that point of extraction where the minerals to make them are exploited, that kind of should call our attention a bit as, climate advocates, as environmental advocates, as, as leftists, and to kind of think about that tension. And the last thing I'll kind of say here, I'm throwing out everything at once, but we'll put it all on the table and then we can dissect a bit, is that, as I sort of started to mention, Western quote unquote governments, US, UK, Europe, are increasingly seeing these supply chains, the ones that produce electric vehicles, solar panels, wind turbines, et cetera, these green technologies, are increasingly seeing these supply chains as, in their words, critical or strategic to geopolitical dominance, right? And they use this language very explicitly. And so the question is, why are they seen as critical? But maybe even also as importantly or more importantly, like, what will applying this security and hawkish lens to green technologies do in the world? What will it achieve? What work will it do? And what kind of consequences might it have?
We talk about like the state sort of pushing outward to sort of find, imperial expansion abroad. But I think that what sort of brings this together, what makes it a kind of, modern imperialism of just a place chasing the capital chasing the frontier, is that I sort of tend to see this, right, as the main thing that modern imperialists are interested in doing. They've understood that in an age where everything is financialized, you don't go to Iraq to get what Iraq has. You go to Iraq to mine the most valuable resource of all, which is the U.S. Treasury, right? And when we talk about giveaways to companies, whether they're taxpayers giveaways or sort of money printing giveaways or whatever, they're kind of they're doing the same thing. They've found a new frontier, which is in deindustrialized America, a place that is wrecked, right? That they go in and for the and to sort of go about unwrecking it, a place that they wrecked when they left, they can then feel free to mine the treasury or the public purse as much as they want, because you don't need gold, you just need dollars, because you can borrow against those, you can lend them, and so on and so on. So I sort of see this is how I kind of see that relationship between sort of the imperialism finding new frontiers in the sort of old heartlands of the metropole, because it doesn't care where it is, our capital is, it just needs a frontier. It just needs a place where it can draw value, and it's realized, hey, we don't need anything fucking real. We can just change the items in the balance sheet, and the Treasury's happy to help us do it, whether it's in Iraq or Ohio.
Yeah.
And that's also something I want to go on to now, right? We've talked about like these industries sort of in the abstract, right? But I think people who are sort of clamoring for the onshoring of for example, lithium mining, right? There's a whole lot of PR around it that says, oh, this is great, this is clean, and we're assuming that mining in the global north will by necessity be more responsible than mining in the global south, even though it's the same countries doing it. And like Canada, for example, because Canada, we say, okay, well, we're going to do mining in Canada, and it's going to be more responsible because it's in Canada. But I think that's hardly true, because it's a Canadian company that tried to, I believe, flood a Romanian town with arsenic so it could mine gold from a nearby mountain. It's a Canadian company that rewrote Bolivia's mining code so that like they could reduce royalties paid to like the local government to like less than 4% of what they ought to have been. I mean, it's the idea that these are going to be more responsible just for being in the global north is, on its face absurd. But could you talk a little bit more about like what people's fantasy of onshore mining is and how that's sort of created by the industry itself?
Yeah, I think that the like apotheosis of how absurd this discourse is, but also like the real world implications of it, is this idea that not only is our global north based mining companies like more quote unquote responsible than like Chinese companies or companies in the global south, and also that like operations based in the global north, like mining in the global north, is like ipso facto, just like prima facie, sorry, wrong Latin, prima facie, like more responsible than mining elsewhere in the world, right? So that's like one version, but like the worst version of this discourse, and the Canadian stuff reminded me of it, because the Canadian mining companies are very good at this, is that mining companies, the companies that pull gold, copper, lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, everything out of the ground to make a variety of technologies, but including the quote green technologies, that mining companies are climate saviors. They have been like working on this discourse for a while. It started, I think, and don't worry, I will get to what mining is actually like. But I just want to layer on this one other piece. So, for a long time, and I study this in Latin America for like over a decade now, mining companies have had confrontations with local communities and movements. And in those confrontations, they have tried to kind of like play up their responsible community, environmental, blah, 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 like clean water, like sort of bona fides. They have said, like, we're good for the environment, we're good for the community, we're good for the local. So at the local level, they've been working at this kind of corporate social responsibility discourse for a long time. But what's happening now that is interesting is that they are projecting this like well beyond the local community in policy circles, with broader publics, and saying like, because green technologies like electric vehicles, lithium batteries, solar panels, et cetera, because all of those technologies begin with mining, that means mining is good for saving the planet, and mining companies are climate saviors. And then this gets very twisted because this framing is extremely productive for them and allows them not only to frame themselves as like good for the environment and good for climate change because they're going to produce the EV, or they're part of producing the EV, but they also then get to frame protesters against lithium, against copper, against all of these mines as bottlenecks. And this is the literal language used. As
but also,
bottlenecks.
if I can jump in now, not just as bottlenecks, but also as threats to the national security now, because they're standing in the way of transitioning away from fossil fuels that are, coming from elsewhere.
Yep. And I have an academic article I'm working on now where I call this the security sustainability nexus. This idea that like somehow security and sustainability are the same thing, and anyone that opposes either of them, right, is like not just standing in the way to climate action, but national security. It's a very productive set of discourses. So again, like leftists just be on alert for it. But let's talk a little bit about what mining is actually like, and how it maybe would or wouldn't change if it's expanded in the global north. So mining is, I think it's safe to say, one of the top like three, if we wanted to rank them, most destructive economic sectors in the world. And it's hard to rank because fossil fuels, which is kind of its own sector, overlaps with mining, right? Fossil fuel extraction is a form of mining. This is clear with coal, but we could apply this to, any type of fossil fuel extraction is a form of mining. So, we might want to single out fossil fuels as being number one most destructive because local impacts plus planetary warming. But any other type of mining is also up there as the most destructive. And it is, I just encourage listeners to go on Google Images and look at what a modern, contemporary, large-scale mining operation looks like. And, you're not going to necessarily see pictures of like destroyed wildlife or whatever, because what you're going to see is a place that has been totally converted into a mine. And so all evidence of like natural habitat or human communities that might have resided there previously is kind of wiped away. And instead, there are pits that are hundreds of kilometers wide. They're hard. I've seen one of the largest copper mines in the world in Chile, the Chicacamata mine. I think it's the largest open pit copper mine, or it's number one or two. Anyway, and it's like, you can't even see it all at once. It's hard to describe. Like I was standing on the precipice of it with on an official tour. And it's like just too big to take in all at once. And the trucks that move material in and out are too big to even describe. They're just like so much bigger than normal trucks, right? So what it does is it massively displaces habitats, communities, in order to like dig enormous holes in the earth that expose all sorts of materials that are normally subsurface to the air, which results in all sorts of like weird oxidation and acidification and all sorts of strange processes that can contaminate soil and water. In addition, that all sorts of chemicals and chemical agents and reagents are used to mine, but also to process and refine, which further contaminate soil and water. In addition, that there are many instances in which entire towns or villages are forced to move and relocate. So they're dispossessed of their land and their former livelihoods. And then we could just go down the list because there's so many impacts. And I also want to just say, because in addition to all these like biodiversity, local livelihood, community, water and soil and air contamination, what we might call localized impacts, there's also climate change impacts, right? And I want to underscore this because of this idea that mining companies are going to save us from climate change. all of this runs on fossil fuels, right? If you go to a mine site, you will just notice tons of generators, tons of trucks, tons of diggers. Like, what do those run on? Some of them are converting their operations to be renewable, which is kind of an amazing, just let's not even go there, because like, whatever, the idea that that makes it like impact free is crazy. Like, even if this was all done on renewable energy, it would still be bad because of the scale and just like the devastating effects of mining. But for now, it also runs on fossil fuels. So actually the mining sector is itself like an important contributor to global warming. And so this is what mining looks like. And then layered on top of all of this is like the additional injustice, which is that the places where mining tends to occur, not exclusively, but like overall and in a pattern, are places that are what we might call sacrifice zones. That's language that activists use, right? They are places that are already marginalized. Often they're places where indigenous people live or where other peasant communities live that are marginalized from political and economic power in the world and in the countries where they reside. And so they are kind of sacrificed. So there's this total inequality between where the resources are mined and then like through those complex supply chains that we talked about earlier, where those commodities ultimately end up and who actually benefits from them, uses them, consumes them, and profits from them. Like, there's an inverse relationship almost between whether you are affected by the extractive frontiers of technological production and whether you benefit from that technological production, either because you consume it, because you own the Tesla, or because you're Tesla and you profit from it, right? And so we have to just keep that in mind. And that is what it looks like now. And for good reason, and it's, obvious and also, but important and inspiring that this is the case. There are tons of really valiant and militant anti-extractive movements around the world, including on the frontiers of green tech, right? So including around lithium and copper and cobalt and nickel that have resisted the expansion of this frontier. And despite the extreme asymmetry between those marginalized communities and their movements and these multinational firms and the governments that are behind them, despite that asymmetry, it is such a critical choke point. Like, if a community can blockade with their bodies, or with their placards, with whatever they use, a mine, they can force that company to the negotiating table, or they can just stall it. Or the sometimes best case scenario actually is that they scare off investors. So investors just deem this too risky, the project is abandoned, and the community wins that way. So I do want to emphasize that there's a David and Goliath piece here. It's not all just about elite designs. It's also that there's real grassroots resistance at these frontiers. So I'll pause for a second. I want to just sort of let that sink in, and then we can talk about like, how would onshoring change this picture? Would it change this picture or not? That's the question that I try to address in the piece. But I think knowing like the status quo ante is important.
And so I think to come just to the real nub of what we're talking about here, we've talked about sort of the way that the extractive industries are linked with imperialism, the way they're linked itself with climate change, the way that like it's sort of almost a 3-card Monte, right? Where you think, oh, we're taking the sort of the fossil fuels out of the supply chain, but actually no, we're just putting them somewhere else less visible, right? How does onshoring sort of propose to change that? Like, let's get to the real sort of nub of the issue.
Yep. So, a couple of key things. Onshoring is not picking up extractive operations, the lithium mining in Chile, the copper mining in Chile and Peru, the nickel mining in Indonesia and Philippines, the Russia, the cobalt mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So these are some primary like producers and exporters of these minerals currently, right? So it's not going to literally pick up those operations and like physically trot them over to the global north. Those operations will continue. They will expand. Every single existing extractive frontier in the global south, especially those related to the energy transition, are expanding, right? Like those governments are being pressured by firms to give them more land to extract, right? So the expansion of the global south not only continues, but it increases, it intensifies. I want to just flag that because this is not about reducing extraction and it's not about literally relocating it. It can feel that way, but it's not. Okay. What is it then? What it is the extraction of the global south continues. All the inequalities and injustices that attend to that continue. They're only changed through grassroots resistance and progressive policymakers there. But what happens in the global north is that new extractive operations set up shop. And how can we have like just more? Well, because, I mean, this might seem obvious, but it's just, again, it's like worth stating. The demand pie, like the overall demand projections for these minerals, especially again the ones related to the Teslas, to the solar panels, to the energy transition stuff, is growing like orders of magnitude. Hard to keep in your brain some of these figures. The International Energy Agency predicts a 4,200, that's 4,200% increase in lithium demand between 2020 and 2040. They wrote that in 2020. I'm sure that they'd actually go up with that prediction at this point, because lithium demand is like unprecedented through the roof. The prices are through the roof. The share prices are going up. It's total boom times, right? So in a boom, more and more projects are brought online, are financed, are invested in, are permitted in order to sell to this growing market, right? And so you can have more in the global south and more in the global north, and there's plenty of demand to kind of sop it up. So I wanted to clarify that. So we have more total planetary mining is the sort of upshot here. And then there's a second question. So we know that like mining in the global north doesn't mean less injustice in the global south. It just means injustice in the global south plus new injustices elsewhere, closer to home. And we also know that, as I mentioned earlier, that the way that this onshoring is achieved is by giveaways to corporations, right? So we also know that like it doesn't mean that like progressive things are necessarily happening in the global north, right? And then let's go to literal onshoring in the global north. So we know how it happens. We know it doesn't make it better in the global south, but is it maybe better than in the global south? Meaning, even if mining continues apace elsewhere, is the mining that happens in the global north and the supply chains that is feedstock for more responsible, more environmentally rigorous, more ethical even, right? Fewer human rights violations. Can we expect that of mining in the US, Canada, UK, and Europe? That's the argument. I don't want to say that there's no difference between mining in the global north and south. I think one thing that could be said, and this just shows you how low the bar is that probably more people would be killed in the global south versus global north in relation to mining. And what I mean is exactly as literal as it sounds. Like Latin America is the number one place in the world where land and water defenders are killed, either by governments, by paramilitary and security things, by the private corporations themselves, by organized crime that is paid by the extractive industries, by whatever assailant. Number one place in the world, Latin America, for people that are resisting extractive projects to be killed. I don't want to downplay the carceral state in the US, which kills plenty of people, but I don't foresee quite as much killing within the US with these onshored mining operations. But I would say just about any other downside of mining will be reproduced in the global north, right? And in fact, I took a really close look because I was open on this question. Like I try to be a materialist. I try to be an empiricist. Like I want to look at what's actually happening before jumping to conclusions. I was open to believing, I'll put it this way, that mining regulations and the environmental regulations related to mining are better in the US and Europe and UK than in Latin America, Africa, South Asia, right? I was open to that. The more I looked, the more I was not convinced. I don't want to make too broad a statement. I'm sure that there are some better regulations, better enforcement. There's certainly more state capacity and money to enforce these things. And there's less asymmetry between corporations and the state compared to the global south. But the regulations are not as good as one might like. And I'll just give just two examples. In the US, the law that regulates mining that happens on public land, which is just side note, interesting. A lot of mining happens on public land in the US, it's federally owned land. The law that regulates that, and so that regulates a lot of these new lithium projects that are coming online, dates to 1872, which should ring two bells. One bell should say, that's a really old law. It's probably not adequate to contemporary mining. Like large-scale mining is totally different than like late 19th century mining was. But the other bell that it should ring, I'm going to pause myself. So the second bell it should ring is that 1872 was like the moment of like one of the like high points of like genocide against indigenous people and of westward expansion in the US, right? So our mining law is like part and parcel of settler colonialism in the US, right? It is not only not designed to protect communities from the ravages of mining companies, it is also designed to encourage mining as a form of territorial expansion.
So in your article, it concludes like with what is to be done, right? And in addition to like in addition to sort of some things that are sort of I think obvious from what we were discussing, right? Like how we said earlier, it's like, well, this is what's needed to save the world if we also want to hold like car culture, for example, constant, right? That you say in your article, it's like we have to that you have to push for a politics of say mass transit, car-free cities, and so on, but also that the fight for global justice in this respect is at the same time a fight for indigenous people's rights. So this is enforced right to community consent. And again, as a Canadian, I'd be like, boy, does Canada love violating that? But indigenous people's rights to prior consultation and consent, but also moratoriums on sort of sensitive on mining and sensitive ecosystems as well, right? And that these things sort of, it's a complex problem with complex causes. And so the solution is complex. You wouldn't immediately think that it's both sort of strengthened sort of rights and support and solidarity with indigenous land defenders would be one of the tools in a toolkit that also has more mass transit. But it absolutely, from what your article says, is, and I find that to be very convincing.
Yeah, I think, given especially the theme of this podcast, like the main takeaway is that there isn't a technical or just purely technological solution to this problem, right? It's not like we can just mine better. We also have to mine less, mine in different places, and think about the role of mining in broader supply chains, right? I am all for coming up with technologies at both ends of the supply chain that are less environmentally intensive, right? Like there surely are somewhat better ways to mine things, right? And better ways to regulate that mining, right? And there also are like battery designs and car designs that need fewer mined resources, right? So I don't want to say I don't care about the tech stuff or the engineering stuff, but I think at its heart, this is a political economy problem, not a technologically narrowly understood problem. And what that means is two things. The only way to get better outcomes is for the people being harmed, the communities at various parts of the supply chain, to have more power to resist that harm and to transform it into something better for them. And also that everything's connected, right? So what drives so much mining is not some like exotic feature of global South landscapes. It is the fact that commodity resource frontiers are like endogenous. They're like internal to the overall mode of production and consumption, right? So what happens upstream in the language of supply chains, like all the way at the extractive node, is really driven by what happens downstream. Like what kind of transportation system, what kind of energy system, what kind of energy transition is being designed by corporations and policymakers. And that reverberates all the way back to the mines in Chile and elsewhere, right? And so I think in order to understand what drives mining and its harms, we have to have a supply chain and a sort of global capitalism view, which then, of course, in terms of our solutions means it's not a tech fix. It's about changing power relations everywhere that, there's leverage, right, to do so. And also about a deeper rethinking about like what kind of energy transition, and knowing that there's more than one way to transition to renewable energy. And one way is to preserve everything about the status quo and swap in solar for oil. And the other way is to take this as a critical juncture and an opportunity to change much more about the way that we in the global north live, so that it's less resource intensive.
Absolutely. I think that's as good a place as any to call it. Thea, I want to say thank you so very much for coming and hanging out with me today.
It was really a pleasure.
All right. Back to me in the studio later.
Wow, that was so interesting. I learned a lot about mining.
Yeah. Great stuff.
Yeah, Milo and Alice, you guys stay pretty quiet for that conversation.
I didn't want to interrupt really.
I just had nothing to add.
No, you really covered everything I would have said so perfectly that it would have felt.
I learned a lot about mining.
Yeah, I know a lot about I assume it's
non-specific mining.
Yeah, absolutely. The extraction, really.
That's right. No,
Yeah.
we're gonna talk a little bit. I read an article. I think we need a little bit of a palate cleanser.
Oh, after that interview? Yeah. I mean, we got into such detail that, like, really, I think we do.
It's going to take a hell of a sorbet.
This is basically an article about a classic guy, a classic type of guy. A man called
a Regency fellow.
A man called Robert McGinnis, who was the owner of various like sort of children's homes and sort of schools specifically for children excluded from mainstream education.
Oh, is that
a British guy, owner of a children's home? Interesting.
Yeah, I'm getting a sense of the kind of vibe of this guy. My fucking like Inland Empire thing is going off here.
Okay,
it's not.
Alice, you've not seen this article.
No.
Give me your spidey sense.
Pedophile.
We absolutely have to take that out.
I know. What I would suggest here is cut that into perfect silence or like some kind of sting, and then just to you going, we have to take that out.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
So no, this is a Guardian article, and again, we're reading the article more to think about the content of the article, not to make fun of the article itself. Revealed money for educating excluded children in Bolton funded bar owners' social life.
Ooh. Okay. I thought this was going to go in a different direction, but instead it's just regular, ordinary corruption, allegedly.
Yeah.
Is he like a sex parties guy?
Yeah. No. He's like
bar owner in Bolton.
I'm going to tell you what he spent the money on.
Is there a jacuzzi at this bar?
And then you can tell me what it is. You can tell me what kind of guy you think he is. So. Basically, the owner of it. So the children's home has been shut down for serious and widespread failure now. But he spent thousands and thousands of pounds borrowing from the charity. That was like because how it works in Britain for Americans, right, is that if there are kids who've been expelled from school, right, they still have to be educated. So they end up going to special schools, and the council pays huge amounts of money to those special schools per place, right? So it's actually very, very lucrative.
This was slightly an improvement on our previous system of putting them in prison.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
So they spent thousands intended for educating marginalized children instead on drinking, foreign trips, and his pub business, which later failed.
I know what type of guy this is now.
Yeah, Alice, what?
Legend.
100%. He's a fucking ledge.
He's a boozy ledge.
How was this man not elected as a Tory MP in 2019?
There is 100% a file photo of this man stood on top of a bus stop mooning the police. Well, no doubt in my mind.
The picture in the article is of him just sitting in a Lamborghini with the door open, wearing a white shirt and light jeans.
Yes.
So between...
do we have the shoes in there too? What's the shoe situation here? I'm feeling loafers, you know?
I don't think we saw the shoes.
I'm feeling very shiny, very pointy loafers with the jeans, but that's.
But imagine if he's a barefoot guy.
You can absolutely like just project your own either very pointy or very square-toed shoes onto Robert.
No, the Essex man likes a tassel loafer, like a Russell and Bromley, no sock. Crucially, no sock. I mean, it wouldn't be from Russell and Bromley; it would be from a shittier store than that. But like.
So,
in that vein,
between 2015 and 2021, £1.5 million was paid by two local authorities to a community interest company run by Robert McGinnis to provide vocational training to children from years 9 to 11, which is ages 14 to 16. Profits from the CIC should, by law, have benefited the community. Instead, McGinnis, a Lamborghini driving plasterer turned failed pub landlord, loaned his
Lamborghini driving plasterer. That's a hell of a corporate car for a plasterer, isn't it?
Loaned his bar business £100,000 from the CIC, which now that it's gone into liquidation, is unlikely to pay back.
Okay, so I know we're going to do an episode about the charity sector at some point, but I find it so funny that like we have regulations for how you can spend money as a charity, and then we just don't enforce them at all. You can just do what you want with it, and then the charity commission is just like, oh well, go on then.
Yeah,
now I assume this chap is to be trusted.
In this case, it had to be the press investigating it, and then several local authorities taking it on themselves to look into it.
Great.
So he also spent thousands from the CIC bank account on his own social life, including trips to Spain, Portugal, Belgium, and Thailand. No, like probably going to like
Belgium
Koh
and Thailand. You
I think probably going to like Koh Phi Phi or Koh Samui or whatever. Like going to a full moon party.
Yeah, sure, certainly. That's definitely the impression we all just formed just now.
What I love about this kind of guy is that they're so dumb, they're smart.
Yeah.
Because they do stuff that's so stupid, like just like, I'm just going to buy myself a Lamborghini out of this charity bank account. And like literally the people who audit charities are like, well, no one could possibly be that stupid. This must be above board somehow.
Yeah, it must be for the kids. He's bought all of the kids a little Lamborghini. Like,
That's right,
genuinely right. I think this is a point of divergence that we have with the United States. And I've talked about my theory of like American grifters and scammers, where I love the American guy who like gets busted by the kind of law enforcement that people forget that they have. Like they get a no-knock raid from the fishing game people. Yeah, exactly. We don't have any of those. Like none of our regulators are like technically cops, and the cops don't give a shit. So my
TV licensing SWAT team.
So that's my position, is every little thing like TV licensing or charity regulation or whatever, just arm all of those guys, please. I think this would work out very differently for this guy.
So here's some of the itemized things he spent money on.
Give javelins to off.
Wait, like a defensive anti-tank weapon?
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
I tell you, you get hit with one of those, you're fucking improving the standard of your school. You know what I'm talking about?
More than 2,000 pounds went on Airbnb stays in a single year, and almost 5,000 was spent on pub furniture. 182 pounds 78 pence.
To be fair, those are quite small amounts of money for the things they were.
Which is that's what makes it so funny.
Yeah,
which is like a total of 182 pounds 78 pence. Was spent in a branch of Spar in Praia du Luz, Portugal.
Awesome.
Buying tarps, a shovel.
So powerful, this kind of guy brain, that they're on a holiday in Portugal and they're like, time to go to the spa.
Absolutely. Pick up some groceries.
Do some fraud at the spa. Wait, also, isn't that where Madeleine McCann went
That
missing?
is what I was alluding to, yes.
Yeah. I see. Yes. Okay. Just got to buy a big sack.
And just shy of 280 pounds was spent in 2019 in a single artisan bakery in Manchester.
Oh.
He basically just had the charity debit card and was just like, I'm gonna pop round to Spar, won't I? Pick up some sausages for the barbecue at my
Absolutely.
Praia du Luz.
Yeah, I was doing a barbecue for the kids in Praia du Luz.
Yeah, we drove to Portugal in my Lamborghini one at a time.
Right. We're doing a Madeleine McCann vigil. And what's your problem with remembering Madeleine McCann? Okay, what's the issue there? I think, to be honest, your own callousness is showing in the tone of this investigation.
I badly want this guy to brazen this out in exactly this way. You know, you can't prove beyond reasonable doubt that I wasn't buying those artisan donuts for a child that I just had with me.
Those kids loved the Lamborghini rides, okay? It improved their day no end.
The Guardian has seen evidence that the CIC's bank account was regularly used to pay staff and contractors working on the renovation and running of a pub called The Printer's Apprentice, a bar restaurant in York City Centre. It opened in February 2020, a month before the first lockdown, and went into liquidation later that year, owing almost £500,000.
Oh
That's what's going to really piss off the people of Bolton, is that all of this money was being funneled into Yorkshire. That's a real sectarian divide.
But like just the idea that like he's just spent £4,600 in pubs as well, just on this car, just getting around it.
It's got to learn how to drink, haven't they? You got to buy a child a pint of Stella.
No, it's only cider that you can buy them
if they're feeling fruity.
You can buy them cider. That's all. But also, payments from the CIC account included £680 for a pub employee who successfully took McGuinness to an employment tribunal for over £7,000 in unpaid wages.
And he paid back a tenth of that? Oh, that's the economy.
Yeah, absolutely. But also but then he paid the legal advisor £5,000 to help him avoid.
Also out of the Lamborghini fund.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what were the kids doing? Were they just like sitting in like a porter cabin in total silence or what?
More or less.
Well, this guy does like donuts around them in a Lamborghini.
Just being like if you can learn how to, hoodwink a local authority out of money for educating you, then maybe you could get a job in the Lamborghini donut business.
Yeah. When dumb people get involved with the law, it's always so fun. That reminded me of, I used to date a girl who was a divorce lawyer, and she told me a story about a couple who were getting divorced. And the total value of their cumulative assets that they were trying to divide and argue over in court was about £2 million. And they managed to spend £1 million on getting divorced.
Oh my God.
Just because they were arguing so much. And it's like, this is like rich people brainworms.
So what basically what happens, right, is he tried to open a school called Stanley House, which was going to charge like up to £40,000 to local authorities per year to educate kids expelled from mainstream education.
That's a significant amount of money, no less. Like that's some serious private school money.
But the thing is, the council pays it because anything that's government procurement always is like incredibly inflated.
Of course.
So it's it never opened after inspectors found numerous problems, including an electricity substation easily accessible to children and no outside space.
Yeah. Got to learn about electricity, ain't they? It's called physics, mate.
Yeah,
there's also a large hole in the wall left by a javelin anti-tank missile. Ofsted declined to comment on this.
Well, it's that apparently, like, what you do with one of these, right, is you just never register it with Ofsted, but you charge the council anyway.
So it's a school, but not if anyone's asking.
Yeah.
So you roll up to the gates of this and you're like, is this a school? And a guy's like, who's asking? Depends.
Yeah. Yeah.
The VDV column has come under attack from Ukrainian special Ofsted. They've been given a needs improvement rating.
I mean, Spetsnaz is kind of like an Ofsted formation too, linguistically, right?
Yeah.
One of those initialisms. Yeah, absolutely.
But the other thing that's really funny is that
the Spice Nazis.
He set up a company with his dad called Drink Me Dry Limited to run the pub.
Suck Me Dry Limited.
Called Suck Me Off Limited to run the pub.
Right. Gettingadicksuck.com.
Why was it called this?
Because these are legends. This is why.
I mean, okay, but like, why did he name his whole company
Suck This Place Dry
Limited?
Adult baby burping services.
Well, the thing is, it's because like it's so he creates these company, and again, this is just classic stupid guy stuff. It's like, as you say, sort of spins around again and becomes sort of instrumentally smart. Whereas like the liquidator for Drink Me Dry, the company that owned The Printer's Apprentice, a bar restaurant in York that failed immediately.
They drank it dry financially.
owed the community the foundation £100,000. But then also to £50,000 to AMG Properties Limited, which is run by his parents. So
just great,
awesome.
Just a guy who was just pure parasitism on every
zero
respect.
chance that they've named that AMG Properties after the souped-up Mercedes, which is like a powerful this type of guy energy.
Oh, absolutely. But it's like I've Spar is the McLaren of supermarkets, and it's the only place that I shop at.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah, I just thought this is just such a perfect encapsulation of a certain kind of just British fucking weasel.
And also just like British local government who are like, time to give this guy money. Seems trustworthy.
None of them have any money, and they give all of the money they do have away to this guy.
Exactly. There's no way that you meet this guy and are A, like, this man has any interest in educating children, or are B, like, this man seems competent and trustworthy. Like, zero chance. Like, you would have to be the biggest mark of all time, which unfortunately describes almost everyone who works in local government.
So I mean, you know what, they all can they can just go on rides in the Lamborghini together. Fuck it, why not?
Sure,
yeah,
absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. We all missed a trick. We all should have been Lamborghini fraudsters.
Yeah, that's right.
That's who this country is by and for, and everybody else. We're just
opening up a Lamborghini driving school for disadvantaged kids. I'm gonna need £8 million for the Lamborghinis.
Oh boy. All right. I think that's about it for today. Hope you're all. I'm going to take that again.
Learned a lot about mining.
You all. Absolutely. When I was my two cretinous co-hosts finally shut up and let me just have a serious conversation about policy.
Cretinous co-hosts. One of us only lies and the other one only tells truths.
That's right. I'm not from Crete. Stop saying it.
Yeah, I'm also not from Crete.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, God damn it. I hate being in a riddle. Never put me in a riddle. No. So thank you for listening. Don't forget we have a Patreon. It is a classic $5 a month for a second episode every week. These two don't know it yet, but I've planned a real humdinger for this week's bonus episode. So do check that out. Anyway,
we're going to be interviewing the Azov Battalion about their new role investigating British schools.
That's right. So see you in a few days.
The Azovsted Battalion.
There we go. You got there you squeaked it in by the end of the episode. You figured it out.
Yeah, there you go. Episode title.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Fuck,
I want an Ofsted Special Forces patch now.